So, good evening, folks. After our 90-minute discussion about the films of Sam Fuller with Marsha yesterday, we're back to the films and history again today, talking about the beloved British actor Kenneth More. And joining me to talk about his career and his films is the author of a book about Kenneth More, Nick Pourgourides. So, how are you this evening, Nick? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. No, I'm very well, thank you.
So tell me how you got involved with the Kenneth More estate and how you got to write a book about Kenneth and how that all came about.
Well, he was my childhood hero. He was my childhood hero. I grew up with his films in the 80s, especially on, ITV. And they would always have repeats of his films. So I just, started watching them on television. I started collecting his films as time went on. And it was just quite, sad as I got older to see that he had been forgotten by so many people. A lot of people didn't even know who he was anymore. And he was Britain's biggest star, of the post-war period. So, I decided to do what I could do in my spare time to have him remembered. And working with the family, we've set up kennethmore.com, the official website, and now the official biography, More Please, which is out now.
Yeah, and links, of course, as usual, are in the YouTube description below to buying the book and to how to get to access the website. And we just talked a little bit before going on live that it's strange for me to accept that someone like Kenneth More isn't known by the younger generation, because to me, I'm like, well, what do you mean he isn't known? Reach for the Sky, Longest Day. But the reality is, I'm 52, and I'm not the generation who are watching films today. And you look at what's being scheduled on BBC and Channel 4, we don't get those classics films being shown in the way we used to. So I guess there's a generation who are skipping over his films, which is their loss. And as we said before going live, he didn't enter one of those big franchises, the Star Wars universe or anything like that, like Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Alec Guinness famously. So, he didn't end up becoming part of a film genre that has sort of outlived himself. His films are kind of rooted when they were made, but he had an extraordinary life, and his stardom came pretty late in his career. Reach for the Sky, he was already in his early 40s. So explain a little bit about his background and how he got into acting, and then of course we'll bring up his pretty incredible war service, really. I mean, he was all the way through the war. We'll discuss that later, but how did it all start for Kenneth More?
Well, it all started really with him needing work, needing a job, running low on money, just happening to be in central London, and walked past a theatre called the Windmill Theatre, Shaftesbury Avenue, and remembered that a man on the top of the theatre door was manager Vivian Van Dam. And he remembered that a man called Van Dam had called on his father, Bertie More, years back to introduce some business venture that didn't happen. So he went in and asked if he could have a job, and told him, that he was Bertie Moore's son. And they said, well, you can start by shifting the scenery and start as a stagehand and work your way up from there. But he certainly was not looking to become an actor. But the bug bit him very, very quickly, and it started really from there. And he moved on from the Windmill to repertory theatre, and from repertory theatre, we hit the wall then, and that's, as he says later, actually helped him with his acting, the experiences that he had during World War II.
Well, that's something that we're going to be discussing with yourself and with John Coldstreamer, who I'm recording with tomorrow, about Dirk Bogarde. For that generation, and as indeed Sam Fuller, yesterday's show, the war completely shaped their careers and their lives, and everything they did after the war was affected by those experiences of traveling the world and seeing conflict and seeing what he did. But was his likability something that comes up very early in his career? I can imagine Kenneth More walking into the Windmill Theatre and say, give us a job, and it just, his likability kind of getting him, it just because he's so affable and so pleasing. I think that's something that comes across in his films. But do you think it was something he displayed early in his life?
I think so. I mean, he was just naturally, he was born like that. He was just naturally very, very charismatic. He never went to acting school. There was no RADA training or anything along those lines. And I think it did influence, his kind of rise into stardom, really. He is just very, very likable, not only on screen, but also everyone that I have interviewed in the book, everybody that I have met or spoken to about him that knew him. So that's what he was like off screen. He was just, incredibly charismatic, very, very likable, warm, sociable person. And, I think that shines through. It shines through pretty much from Genevieve, 1953, which was the film that set him on the road to stardom. And then from then onwards. So that was kind of his calling card to a certain extent.
Yeah, and let's talk about his war, because we're not going to go into huge much detail, folks. We'll do a naval show at some point with Dr. Alexander Clark about HMS Aurora or something like that to cover the career in detail. But he was Merchant Navy and then went Royal Navy. So was he an early into the war? Did he wait to get drafted? Explain how it progressed.
He was in the Merchant Navy. He was on HMS Lobus, that he called a seagoing Genevieve. Exactly, very full of power, as you can imagine. And then moved on to HMS Aurora, and saw a lot of conflict, a lot of action. And I think he started on HMS Aurora as a watchkeeping officer, and then moved on to the 4-inch gun platforms. For the anti-aircraft gun platform, and it was during his time on Aurora that the captain, Bill Agnew, had asked him to actually come onto the bridge and act basically as the eyes and ears of the crew below deck, and to inform them what was going on via a microphone as to what was going on during the conflict. And as Kenny used to say, there's nothing worse than being in a conflict, and you hear all these bangs and crashes and everything else, and you don't know what's happening above. So the idea was to, and I think Bill Agnew, the captain, I think was one of the first people to actually have this idea of an officer on board the bridge that would be able to report to the crew below deck during action. And Kenny said that actually really helped him. His acting helped him just to keep his nerve. I mean, he was frightened like everybody else, but he managed to kind of keep his nerve and to keep his balance when reporting the action that was happening above to those below. And it had a huge impact on him, great impact on him, as it did pretty much everybody, of course, who served.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of research, and I found out it doesn't seem to be a regular thing on ships in World War II to have someone who is there to share the news, if you like, with the people below deck. It seems to be fairly unofficial and maybe spread within fleets and within forces, but it doesn't seem to be particularly common. But it's and interesting when we get to the films later on and things like Sink the Bismarck and a film that he wasn't in, Battle of the River Plate, the audience always knows what's going on. The audience are taken from the bridge to below decks, then back to the bridge again, then we get to the enemy bridge and back to there. So the audience always knows fully what's going on, but the participant below decks in the engine room or the participant in the ammunition, they have no idea what's going on. So I think it's a really nice idea that this captain decided to have this system. But I can imagine an actor, it's almost like a role of a lifetime, because it's kind of you're setting the scene. You're having to, because you can't just list boring facts. Well, we're 2 miles off now. You'd have to sort of convey some element of drama.
Yes, absolutely.
And for those who are watching, HMS Aurora had a. We're not going to go into too much detail, but it had a extraordinary career. It was involved in the off the coast of Norway. It was in the hunt for the Scharnhorst and the guys. Now it was Mediterranean in the Battle for Malta, Salerno, Torch. It did all the major campaigns. Hit and damaged several times back to Liverpool for repairs. So that ship was in the thick of it all the way through. So he would have gone from major campaign to major campaign, and that doesn't, it, as we'll talk about later on, clearly influenced the rest of his life. I mean, I don't want to sort of stay out of turn what we're going to say later, but what do you think the war was for him? How did it change him as it went along?
I think it shocked him, as it shocked many people who also served, and I think also it gave him a grounding that perhaps he didn't have before. He kind of from one thing to another, and it was only really the stage that really became his kind of first entry point into any form of education or a proper job. But I think a lot of his time during the war was very much, as you say, it informed his later career, but it also it kind of tended to really forge the man that he became. So I think it had a huge impact on him. Angela Douglas, his wife, said when things were going wrong in his career later on, when things weren't quite going to plan, he took it very much on the chin. And she said a lot of other actors that had gone through similar things would throw all their toys out of the pram and would be in dire straits. But Kenny, having served in the war and having been on the watches where you'd have to kind of recover bodies during a conflict, he knew that in comparison these things were small and insignificant compared to people who lost their lives and the tragedy they had seen. So I think it, as I say, greatly informed his later life, and he took a lot of his career with a pinch of salt, really. When things were up, they were great, and when they were down, that's just the way it is.
Because in your day job, you work as a publicist, so you work with actors and movie stars and television stars, and there can be a little bit of seriousness about their craft along there. I was watching some interviews down on YouTube with Joan Collins. I was looking for clips of Kenneth More, and I found a clip of Joan Collins, how you go on to thing, saying acting is the most difficult job in the world, and you're thinking, no, it isn't. Going down coal mines, paramedics. There's lots of jobs that are tougher than. I'm not saying that being an actor doesn't have its tribulations, and a lot of actors are out of work all the time. And I'm not saying it's the easiest job in the world, but it seems to me, reading your book, that he didn't take it too seriously in the sense that what a great job to be doing compared to other things in the world. That's and maybe he didn't perhaps put the same focus on it as other people, because it was such a relief to be doing something fun, having done something so horrible in the war, that let's just go with it, coast with it, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just putting words in your mouth there, but
no, but it's very much that case. I mean, in 1975, the Variety Club, which is now Variety Children's Charity, gave him an award for 40 years in show business, and it was a big kind of gala event held at the Savoy Hotel, and everybody was there, including Douglas Bader. And Kenny kind of gives the final speech and talks about his life and career, and it's interesting because he touches upon the direction of his career and then mentions the war, and then just says, "But I won't go into that. I've got a lot of stories, but I won't go into that," because everybody of that era had their own stories. Everybody of that era experienced similar things. They all had served, and so Kenny was always one of these people where, even though he was proud of what he had been able to do during the war, he obviously lost a lot of people and seen a lot of hardship and experienced a lot of very, very difficult and upsetting situations. But he knew that his experience was no different from anyone else that served, and I think it's very telling that he other than his autobiography, and even in his autobiography, he doesn't really talk hugely about it. He mentions some moments. I think that's very reflective of the people of that time, what they shared, what they didn't share, and the fact that a lot of them knew that they had all gone through similar things, and nobody was any more important just because of they had served on one ship or whatever.
And that is, I mean, not that we're going to go down the rabbit hole of discussing other actors who've embellished their careers, but there has been some cases of well-known Hollywood figures and British actors who kind of exaggerated their careers. Christopher Lee did it a little bit towards the end. He had been in the desert, he had been attached to special forces. By the end, people were saying he was an SAS fighter, and he wasn't. He was an RAF liaison officer. It happened with this American actor Charles Durning, who went from him serving in Normandy to him landing first wave on D-Day and earning the Silver Star. And these stories kind of embellished. When I was doing the prep for this, before I even met you, there's a surprisingly little about Kenneth More out there. He didn't allow himself to go into flights and fancies interviews and say, oh, yes, I helped win the war and it was me there doing that. And there have been cases of that with people who became famous later, rather embellishing their war stories. And there's his medals there. There's no gallantry awards as such. It's just a standard set of awards for someone who did the whole way through. 39, 45 Star, Atlantic Star, Africa Star, but they're all there. He had a complete war without actually doing anything majorly noteworthy, because most people go through wars without doing anything majorly noteworthy. Not everybody is destined to be Audie Murphy. Most people just go through doing their job, and he did his job, came back from it, and didn't want to talk about it. And I have respect for someone who's like that and didn't go to town with it. And and
a lot of people, I mean, that he met later or around that period, like for example Mountbatten. It was really the reason a lot of those people he continued to stay in touch with was because of he was an actor, was because of he was doing various events for the film industry, or supporting one thing or another, where it was as I say, working, going to events where Mountbatten was there, or whether or not it was the Duke of Edinburgh was there. So a lot of these things just linked into his acting career, as opposed to what he had done during the war, and that that being a special reason for him meeting any of these people. It's really down to his acting.
Yeah. So we'll come to the end of the war, and of course, the other thing that happened with anyone whose career was interrupted by the war is, 5-6 years have passed. So you're older at the end of it than you are at the start, and he wasn't in his 20s by he's already in his 30s by then. So what happened after war? Did he go straight back into acting? What did he do first?
Involved in 1946, he had to go to Earl's Court, as many of them did, and had to pick up, whatever clothes that he could, get that had been donated. I think he had some rather hideous pork pie hat, I think he said. And he would go for auditions on occasion, or to to meet agents in his Royal Navy uniform. I mean, that was that's the best way of presenting yourself then. But he was very lucky. He kind of was able to kind of get his career going after the war rather quickly. There was an agent called Harry Dubins that he was put in touch with, who was looking for actors who'd served, on the front. But he didn't want anybody who hadn't served, which I thought was very, very interesting. As to why that was the case, whether that he was looking for people that he felt would have extra experience, life experience, to be able to convey that with in their acting style, or whether or not he was specifically looking to help those people out of the end of the war, who had been actors beforehand. We don't know for sure, but that helped him. And very, very quickly, he ends up at Alexandra Palace, helping Michael Barry restart the BBC with a lot of television plays, live television plays. And from then onwards, he's moving very, very quickly in small parts, but moving very, very quickly, and also into film. And
he did all three, didn't he? All through his career, he did film, TV, and stage, and didn't sort of just go for one thing. And that was in an era when that wasn't always possible, switching back and forth between the genres. Today we accept that Cillian Murphy does, a season of Peaky Blinders, then goes and makes a big Hollywood film and goes back again, and maybe does some work on the stage. But back in the golden era of the 50s, movie stars didn't really do TV, did they?
No, well, I mean, it was one of those funny things where the TV was just really starting up after the war. I mean, obviously, it had been there before, but it was restarting. And then obviously he moved into film and then became a huge star. And then as times changed later on in the kind of early 60s, and people were moving away from the kind of gentrification of movies. Into kind of more kitchen sink dramas and the like. He then moved from film back to television and then became another huge international star in the 60s with the Forsyte Saga, which really in some ways made him more popular than he had ever been, even as a movie star. So, and then of course the stage. I mean, he was, in Terence Raskin's Deep Blue Sea that he was a huge star in, and continued in the theatre all the way up to pretty much the end of his career.
I must tell you a funny story. Well, it's funny to my family about the Forsyte Saga because it was my mum's favorite program when she was pregnant with me. And I was due to be born on whichever day it was, but ended up coming early and was born on the day the last episode was shown on TV. And my mum missed it because she was in hospital delivering me. And it had been however many episodes. Was it 20 something? It was long, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because of people of a younger age group perhaps won't remember the series. They may remember the remake with Damian Lewis, but the series, the Forsyte Saga, is one of those very early series. It was like, as I say, it was a huge hit, huge global hit, and it was the show that everybody tried to leave work straight on time to get home and watch, and to take the phone off the hook and concentrate on. So it was one of the, I guess one of those precursors to The Crown or any of those big series you have now.
So my mum ended up, they'd end the story. My mum missed it and had to wait for it to be repeated, or whether it was 2 years later or something. And it's still a bone of contention in the family that I made her miss the last episode of the show. But anyway, I think she's forgiven me now, my mum. But we'll move into his kind of film career, and particularly his war films, because there are some big ones. But he had a couple of minor roles in some films that people maybe forgotten he was in. He was in Morning Departure, which was a post-war submarine rescue film. I think one of John Mills's best post-war performances, and very understated. He had a bit role in that. And it's worth checking out, that one. It's rather grim. It's got a bit of a downbeat ending. But that's he was in that as a bit role. And Appointment Venus, which is a kind of a comedy Jersey set World War II adventure. He had quite a larger role in that, but still not, not above the title, not in the main cast. But do you think either of these early roles had made people notice, or was it all really till Genevieve that people really noticed?
I think it was really till Genevieve. I mean, he was there in the background, but obviously when you have towering legends like David Niven and John Mills right at the front, I don't think many people were looking elsewhere in the cast, and very much so with Scott of the Antarctic, which was the film that he had the biggest part in before obviously his career really took off. And even then the camera really was moving on to John Mills all the time, and he was kind of in the background. So yeah, it was Genevieve really that was the film that set him on the road to stardom, and a film that the studio didn't even really want to release because they didn't think it was any good, and they didn't think anyone was going to go and see it. So it was a surprise film that then led to Doctor in the House, and then we move up to 1956 and Reach for the Sky.
And Genevieve seems to be one of those films that used to be on the TV all the time, and now I haven't seen it for years. Same with Doctor in the House. That seemed to be on all the time when I was a kid, and I haven't seen that film for years. I mean, I guess I could find it and buy it on DVD, but it doesn't. It's not in the consciousness like it was when I was growing up. But we must come to the absolute classic of Reach for the Sky, which was I watched it this afternoon to refresh my memory, and unusual casting really, in that he was too old. I mean, when Douglas Bader had his accident, he was 21 years old. Kenneth More was he 41, 42 when he shot it or something?
Yeah, he's already in his 40s. So yeah.
I mean, okay, by the end of the film, the character has aged, so he's better suited at the end. But what are there any stories about how he came to be cast in that? Were there other people lined up for the role? Did he have to fight for it? Did he was the first to get it? How did it happen?
He read the book by Paul Brickhill in the south of France when he was on holiday, and just after putting the book down, said, "This is the film that I have to make. I have to play this part." Barder had kind of imbued kind of the great, British tradition of fortitude and heroism and against all odds, and he really wanted to play the part. It at the time that he wants to play the part had already been offered to Richard Burton, who then turned it down. Whether or not it was down to him not being able to secure the time to actually film it or not, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is, Kenny then gets the part, and Lewis Gilbert directs him in it, who had worked with him beforehand, and Kenny went to meet Barder, played a round of golf with him at Glen Eagles, that's Kenny used to say that's the way that you get to meet, get to know somebody like Douglas Barder. Play a round of golf with him. Barder thrashed him on the golf course, which is that's hilarious. But they became very, very, very good friends over time. But Barder liked him. He liked Kenny, and Barder was not particularly keen on people in the film industry. He wasn't really that keen on the way that they were doing things. But when they cast Kenny, he was totally sold on it and thought that they had made a really good decision in casting him. And Kenny made the point of saying, "Well, I don't want to see too much of you, because if I see too much of you, I will caricature you," which Barder was quite, taken aback by and admired him for that. And from then onwards, he's determined to play this part, and he does whatever he can do to make it as authentic as possible, to the point of going to Roehampton to the limb centre up there to get essentially metal constraints, metal socks put onto his legs to kind of restrict his movement, so that he is able to kind of portray the Barder walk as best as he can. Angela Douglas said, years later, Kenny would tell her how deeply in pain he was from these things rubbing on his legs all the time. So he was suffering even when he was playing the part. But he really wanted to give the role his all, and to really give it as much justification as he possibly could do. And I think it shows on screen.
It does. And the interesting thing is that, because if Richard Burton had got the role, and I love Richard Burton as an actor as well, by the way, but I watched it this afternoon. There's a lot of his lines, the way Kenneth More delivers them, it could easily come across as being very kind of nasty. He's very demanding. He tells everybody what to do. There's no, shall we do this? It's do this, do that, get me that, do this. And in a different actor's shoes, that would have come across very differently. But somehow Kenneth More manages to give Barder this elegance and sort of sense of humor that wasn't really there. I mean, the historians watching this will know that Douglas Barder was a complicated character, not particularly likable in many ways, loyal to his friends, but there were a lot of people who had good things to say about him. A lot of people had bad things to say about it. He, in the time the film came out, he made some rather racist comments about what was happening in the Suez crisis and things like that. But the point is, the public now, the version they understand of Douglas Barder is the Reach for the Sky performance, not necessarily Barder's own appearance. I mean, he was on This Is Your Life and what have you, Douglas Barder, but I think most people would accept it's Kenneth More's portrayal. But how much when he was acting was that Kenneth More? How much was he following the script? Was it Lewis Gilbert? Do you know how that sort of dynamic worked out when they actually shot it? Because he does come across, I say, very likable during the film. And is that because Kenneth couldn't not be likable?
I think it's because he couldn't be could not be likable, and to make the film accessible to an audience, and a combination of that, and also his relationship with Lewis Gilbert, who he trusted greatly, and directed a lot of his films. And then obviously went on to direct several James Bond films as well. So I think it was a combination of things really that led to the portrayal that you see on screen. And I guess, Kenny was playing for showing the best qualities of Barda, and that, of course, happens with a lot of biopics where, it's especially when it's somewhat official, is that obviously they're portraying the very best as opposed to warts and all. And they stayed friends. They stayed friends throughout their life together. And you see there's a photo there from 1975, the Variety Club 40th anniversary in show business, which was televised on ITV. And Barda was there for that. And even in the it's always been reported that Kenny died of Parkinson's disease. He actually is believed now to have multiple system atrophy, which is kind of rare degenerative disorder, linked in some way to Parkinson's. And when he was ill in the kind of last moments of last year, really, of his life, he couldn't go to the aforementioned This Is Your Life that Barda had. So he sent Angela along. And you can hear him whisper to her, "I'll come round and see him." And he did go round and see him. So that actually did happen. And Angela told me that Kenny just didn't want to see him. He wanted him to remember him as he once was, especially portraying Barda with so much, heroism. He didn't want to be seen, he wanted to be remembered the way that he once was. And so Barda went away not seeing him. And the strange thing is that Kenny died in, I think it was, he died in July of 1982, and Barda died only a few months later. So wasn't there for Kenny's memorial, which was held in September. So they died the same year, and not only a few months apart from one another.
And again, it seems to me from my limited research that in latter years, when Douglas Barda's reputation was starting to take a bit of a knock, Kenneth More didn't kind of come out and say anything negative. He was always positive and didn't jump on any kind of dismissing bandwagon. Which, if you think about George C. Scott playing General Patton in 1970, later on, George C. Scott sort of disassociated himself a little bit from it, and he sent someone else to get his Oscar and things. He didn't want to be associated with this real life figure, but Kenneth More seemed to be loyal to him all the way through, even though Barda was prickly and was difficult and was not a very likable man. But he said that as we said, the movie stands as a representation of someone overcoming horrendous disability to fly again. And those who watch it, as I did this afternoon again, you can't help but respect what Barda overcame without necessarily liking the individual behind it. That's the same with Richard Todd playing Guy Gibson and Dan Busters, another prickly character. The real Guy Gibson wasn't, terribly warm and fuzzy. But yeah, Reach for the Sky, that's the movie that made him better known overseas as well, isn't it? Because Reach for the Sky, they really tried to sell it in the USA as well, because it had the Battle of Britain side of things and to promote Britain's war effort. We were talking before going online that Ken never kind of went to Hollywood. Was he offered a chance to go to Hollywood? Was he offered any big, huge productions over there?
Yeah, he was offered many opportunities to go there. He was offered 2 films with Marilyn Monroe. He just didn't want to go. He felt that there was a very kind of glossy product that they made in those days. He got his money up to £50,000 or wherever it was, which those days was a lot of money. It still is now, but much more then. And he didn't really see what could be bettered by going to Hollywood. He loved England, and he kind of wanted to stay here. In hindsight, and hindsight's a great thing, it was probably a mistake, because it would have given him far more scope and his film career far more longevity. But then, things along the way also happened that kind of stopped that as well. I mean, he was offered the part of the father in Mary Poppins, famously played now by David Tomlinson. Of course, if you ask people who's David Tomlinson, they'll say Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, perhaps slightly afterwards. But nobody really remembers him, as we're talking about with people who remember big franchises, other for those 2 films. So if Kenny had done that, or had done a big Hollywood movie that had become a great success, maybe my job wouldn't be needed as much as it is today.
Yeah,
to have him being reminded.
I mean, the closest he got to a Hollywood film, but it was Northwest Frontier. because Lauren Bacall was the imported kind of American star, and it had an international feel to it. But it had a different title in the States, didn't it? It was called something else there, wasn't it?
Fate of India, I think. Yeah.
And they truncated it a bit. They shortened it, and it wasn't quite as good. But that is the closest, I think, to him kind of taking on the Errol Flynn type role. And a great film, actually. Very
yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's the closest essentially to him playing an action hero. The closest he really had. And obviously, the film is somewhat marred now by the kind of cultural, sensitivities that obviously, acceptable now, but obviously then it was part of history. But at the same time, the performance he gives is brilliant. It's very well shot. It's it's action packed. The rapport that him and Lauren Bacall have is wonderful, and I think they even wanted to see and test the water whether or not there was any romance between them, but there wasn't. They became friends and stayed good friends all throughout his life, and Lauren Bacall was there at the memorial after Kenny passed. So it's a very important film.
And that's something you touched on earlier and before we went live, is that when you wrote your book, everybody wanted to come forward and offer you fantastic stories. No one was negative, and that's not always the case. Sometimes you're reading a biography of an actor and you find that there's not many quotes from his peers, and you wonder whether it's because they didn't want to say anything nice, so they kind of struggle to do that. But anyone who seemed to work with Kenneth More seemed to think he was great. I mean, that's a testament again to his supreme likability. The other thing about Northwest Frontier is it's also a bit of a film of about 20 years early. It's made in the 50s, but it's got a very 1930s sensibility. I think even at the time, its views on India were a bit outdated. It just kind of treated it as it was a Western, really. It was filmed more as a Western that happened to be set in India. It was filmed in Spain, wasn't it? It wasn't a film anywhere near the real India, but a great film and of its time.
It was actually filmed in India. It was. Was it? They did go there. I know that Sheriff of Fractured Jaw, which was the Western, that was filmed in Spain.
Maybe I'm getting mixed up.
No, they did film out there, and it was, I think, one of the hardest shoots he said he'd ever filmed on because of how the heat and everything else.
But yeah, and for those who haven't seen it, you can find a copy on YouTube. It's easier to see now, and just take it with a pinch of salt and accept the fact that the values portrayed are a bit different then as they are now. But still, he again, you can't knock his performance. He makes it the character very likable, very heroic, but it leads us dovetails nicely with our next film, which I think we're going to be spending a bit of time talking about, because to me, Sink the Bismarck is in terms of his war films, that's his greatest. That's his Sergeant Pepper, if I'm going to use a Beatles analogy there. All that experience in the war all came through there. So how did that movie come about? Again, was he the first choice for that movie? Did he fight for it? What's the story behind it?
Well, I think he was pretty much the first choice. Obviously having done Reach for the Sky and that being a huge success, it was, again, working with Lewis Gilbert, and they had a kind of really good relationship and often worked together on many films and many of Kenny's kind of classic films. And Kenny was very, very keen to play the part because he had served obviously in the war, but specifically in the Royal Navy, and knew of the hunt, the search for Bismarck. And here, of course, he's playing Captain Shepherd, so he's been upgraded and ranked from his time in actually serving in the war. And his performance it's probably one of my favorite, if not the favorite. I'm always a bit, I always balance between Reach for the Sky, because obviously it's the big hit and the one that made him really famous after Genevieve and Doctor in the House. But it's the fact that his portrayal here is so different. I mean, it's completely different from anything else that he played. If you take Richard Grimsdyke in Doctor in the House, or Ambrose Cleverhouse, and you can put them next to Captain Shepherd, they're completely different. And that shows you really the versatility he had. Even with Bart, his portrayal of Bart, it's very different. There is no humour at all. It's a very hard hitting film. And I remember the first time I saw it on VHS way back in the 80s. I had to kind of do a double take, and is this Kenneth More? Because it's not what you expect him to be like. You touched on this earlier with Reach for the Sky. There is humor there. There is kind of lighter moments. You don't see any of that in Sink the Bismarck. In fact, you see weeping at the end. So it's just such a brilliantly shot film, well acted, and it's now available, thankfully on Blu-ray, so you can see it. It's
I mean, I
very,
watched
very best
that
position.
last week, and I had somehow forgotten about the weeping, the crying scene. I don't know why I'd forgotten about that scene, but it struck me again as that when that movie was made. So you're in the peak of the war films, late 50s, early 60s. That's when all the Guns of Navarone and 633 Squadron and The Coldest Story and Ice Cold Annex. You don't see many heroes in war films cry in that era. You're going on, I think you're perhaps on to Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, have a character kind of showing some emotion in the film. And that was, I wonder when, because in the film, his son is on the Ark Royal, isn't it? And then his son goes missing. I wonder how much he's drawing on what his family must have thought when he was on service, because he was a young lad away during the war, and now he's playing the father figure in the film. And a friend of mine from way gone back, he used to know Dana Winter very well, who was his co-star, and she said to him and to me that he was her favorite co-star ever. Just such a lovely, lovely person that meant going to work was a joy. And apparently they had long hours on the film, like they're saying in the film, they're meant to be underground for hours and hours and hours. The film was shot in such a way they seemed to be on that set for a long, long time, and how he made it very pleasurable and very, very enjoyable, and a great role and a very worthy entry of it. There are heroics, but there's that other side of the fact what happens when you have to make decisions. It kind of takes on what Jack Hawkins does in The Cruel Sea when he allows the people to be mown down in the water, because he's having to make that gamble as a commander where he's risking forces and that burden of responsibility, that real burden of command. And I think he obviously, he'd been on the bridge with real commanders during the war. He saw what that burden of command was. And I think you can completely see his understanding of the Royal Navy shine through in that film.
Yeah, very much so. It's as I said, it's such a good film. It's such a good war film, but it's just, it's just so different a type of character for Kenny to play when everybody thinks of the happy-go-lucky, jovial, character of Genevieve and type. So it's if you haven't seen it, for those very few perhaps who haven't seen it, do check it out, because it's a great film.
It's a great film. And then we move, of course, to it's more than a cameo, but it's not a major role in The Longest Day. But it is one of those roles. As a tour guide in Normandy, I meet lots of Americans who come to Normandy, and they've seen Saving Private Ryan, they've seen Saving Private Ryan for The Longest Day. And Kenneth More's portrayal of Colin Maud is one of the ones Americans remember. I don't know if it's because of the dog or the beard, but there's so many stars in that film. It is sometimes when you're rewatching it, you forget, I forgot he was in it. I forgot Roddy McDowall was in it. I forgot Donald Houston was in it. But Kenneth More, again, he takes that role and makes it work. And that combination of comedy and drama and the real figure of Colin Maud. How did he get that film? Was that again? Was it because of his experience, the Royal Navy experience, or was it just
so? I think obviously the same. We'll obviously probably touch on with Battle of Britain. He was kind of, if you're going to have a war film, you have to have Kenneth More in it, off the back of Reach for the Sky, and again probably Sink the Bismarck as well. And it was towards the tail end of his kind of leading man film career anyhow. So I think he was quite chuffed that the director had asked for him to be in the film, and not only because there are so many great peers in the film, but also there's a lot of up and coming actors in that movie who all become stars subsequently, and of course he's playing, Kenny just loves playing real life war heroes, and in fact when he's playing Colin here, he's got his actual stick, Colin's stick, that he used during the war, that was what he was actually using on the set, shooting for The Longest Day. So that's a kind of a nice little link back to the actual, real man.
And did he? I mean, did he get to? He had the stick. Did he get to meet Colin Moore? Did he spend any time with him?
I don't know if he actually ever did meet him. I mean, I'm not surprised if he did. To be honest with you, I don't. There's nothing we have in the archives that says that he did. But I'm not surprised that he. I'm not surprised that he did at some point.
I mean, of course, the interesting thing about that for the history lovers is, of course, the real Colin Moore had a German Shepherd dog. But they had to make him a bulldog in the film because the German guy has a German Shepherd. There's the Pluska, the German commander, has so he couldn't have had two German Shepherds. It had to be a bulldog. But yeah, and now when you buy models of the figure, you can buy a model kit. The model comes with the bulldog, not with the German Shepherd. Although I think one version it comes with both, and you can decide whether you, the model maker, decide whether you want to go authenticity or whether you want to go for movie. But yeah, he's somehow in a movie of 48 international stars. He does manage to make the most of his moments. You do remember him. He has that scene, whacking the Universal Carrier, and Sean Connery is there in an early role. And as you say, it's interesting that it really is he's in the changeover now between leading man and character roles. And because Reach for the Sky was already in his 40s, and he was a late bloomer in sense of getting that international fame. So compare him to someone like Dirk Bogarde. He was 10 years younger than him, had a longer career as a leading man. But yeah, Longest Day, amazing role. And then after that, there are some interesting films. The various directions he goes there. We Joined the Navy is a really odd and hard to find kind of service comedy that I watched a couple of years ago. It's not brilliant. Ken is good in it, but it's not a.
Yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, it looks good visually. It looks good. I mean, it's got some great locations to it. It just doesn't work. It was directed by Wendy Toy, who was a good friend of Kenny's, and she had worked with him beforehand. Had a lot going for it. It just didn't work. And in fact, there's a small cameo there from Dirk Bogarde in that film. Playing the Doctor, but yeah, it just didn't work. And I think this is now venturing into films that were not being as successful as they should have been, and then obviously producers moving on from choosing him in leading roles.
And the movie Hollywood is changing. It's the mid 60s now. Everything is going for Britain is going for the kitchen sink drama, and America's going for the very realist Arthur Penn, Bonnie and Clyde, very serious, gritty movies, Wild Bunch. So Kenneth More is now seeming a bit of the past era, not the current era. It's a bit like Dirk Bogarde managed to make the transition into kind of art house films quite successfully, but Richard Todd famously went back into theatre. Alec Guinness ended up finding Star Wars, but you can see Kenneth More's career sort of on a bit of a wobble there. So at this point, when you said earlier about the fact he'd been through the war, when his career's not peaking, did he lose enthusiasm for the profession? How did he keep going?
No, he loved the profession. He just took it in his stride. There were a couple of opportunities which would have been huge, for his career, and didn't work out. And he just wasn't that sort of person. He wasn't the sort of person that would be kind of, why has this happened to me, and this and the other. He just went. He just moved from film into television, and made huge, successes there, and also on the stage, and was still doing films. I mean, as potential, but they're more supporting.
Yeah.
By this point.
And I want to mention this next performance that I had forgotten he'd made. I was doing my prep for this because a lot of people watching this show remember the book The White Rabbit, about the famous British RAF officer agent involved in SOE and resistance activities, and it was one of those staple books that you read along with The Great Escape and The Dam Busters and indeed Reach for the Sky. And he appeared in a TV version. But tell us a bit about the weird situation where it only got shown once. And Angela Douglas, his wife, said it was one of his favorite roles of his career, and I'm sure people watching this now go, I never heard of this. So tell us about it.
Well, yeah, as you say, it was one of those stories that everybody kind of grew up on reading, and was no different for Kenny in knowing of the story and wanting to portray him. Similar in the way that he portrayed Barda. He really, really wanted to do this, and the rights, I believe, were tied up, but BBC being the BBC, they were allowed, being the British Broadcasting Corporation, to be able to do a one-off version of The White Rabbit that would be televised, but were not allowed to be repeated, and they had to wipe the tapes afterwards, which is just, so upsetting, given that it was, as many people have said who've seen it. Sadly, I've never seen it. It was probably his best performance ever. Probably trumped, playing Barda, and anything else that he played in terms of a dramatic role. There's some harrowing torture scenes in there, and but just the way these things go, the tapes are wiped. We hope that somewhere somebody's got a copy of it, and it may see the light of day. And the sad thing is that the idea that the rights were being held back because this big major film was going to be made afterwards, that never happened. Certainly not with Kenny involved, even though he was tipped for a film version prior to this. So it is that lost gem in his career, but also a lost gem, obviously, for anyone who's interested in war history.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I hope it'll turn up like some of these Doctor Who episodes turn up every now and then on VHSs in Australia and things like that. So there's always hope. But yeah, it's just and I'd forgotten it existed. And then we move on to The Dark of the Sun, or The Mercenaries, which is actually of the mercenary films I like it. And the Fighting on Film, a podcast that does some work with me, Matt and Robbie reviewed this film recently for their podcast and said how moving and charismatic Kenny More it is. And again, he somehow brings likability to a not particularly likable character. The guy is a drunk. He's at the end of his career in the character. He's a doctor who's not really a doctor out in the Congo, and Rod Taylor kind of has to cheat him into joining this mission to go and rescue the civilians and the diamonds. But he has this amazing, powerful scene where he helps with a birth that's going badly of a Congolese woman, and it's a great little cameo. He brings it great depth. And that was filmed in Jamaica. How did that film come about for him?
I think it's just something that came his way, and the work, to be honest with you, probably one of the very few occasions you could probably say that about something that he did. It was probably around the time that he was struggling with getting lead roles or roles that he really wanted to play, and I think it was, for him, it was probably his least favorite acting experience. I don't think he got on particularly well with Rod Taylor, and as you say, it's quite his performance in it is great, and it's very different again. Maybe it was a stretch too far, not in terms of his performance. He gives an excellent performance, but it's just quite far away from a character you'd expect him to play. But as you say, he brings great sensitivity towards that part. And I mean, I think his performance is wonderful in it. But probably his least favorite film that he worked on, unfortunately.
I mean, it's one of those, me and my mate Colin, who's watching this, hi Colin, we were talking about Michael Caine's career the other day, and you could tell in the 70s by how much Michael Caine committed to the role, whether he was doing it for the money or not. He give you, if you pay him enough, he'll do you an A game. If you don't pay, but Kenneth More he always gave it the full. He always, whatever the role, to me, he's I'm going to go into this with the same, pretending it's Shakespeare, and he. Even in some of these sort of lesser films, or lesser roles, he's, as you say, still very believable, very sincere, and makes his limited screen presence really work. But we're going to move on to Fraulein Doctor is an odd one again. That's one that we're talking about. Alec Guinness having made these Star Wars film. There's a film that's, again, pretty much lost. Big, huge budget, 60s spy kind of. It's World War I, but it's kind of James Bond as well. Female lead. Kenneth More has quite a major role in it, but it's just not seen anymore. People do not see Fraulein Doctor, and yet I remember seeing it on a cronky old Italian channel something years ago, and that scene of the horses with the gas masks in the First World War was really, really striking. And people who have seen Fraulein Doctor remember it fondly, but most people, alas, just haven't seen it. So he did seem to have these great opportunities of classic films and also other roles that just were good, but the film just, well, like White Rabbit, just has been lost. So what's the backstory of Fraulein Doctor? Was that just another acting job, or was he a bit more invested?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was like 2 or 3 films around this period, including Dark of the Sun, but this one as well, which I think was shot in Yugoslavia, and it has a very much a kind of art house, independent feel to it. You know, I mean, he's great in it as again, but there's it just for some reason just doesn't work, that film, for me anyway. But so it's one of these things that just has, you can seek it out, but it's not something, as you say, that gets shown often. I mean, it was just one of those, I think, that came out and had a small presence and then kind of disappeared, really.
Which I think you could almost say the same thing for Oh, What a Lovely War, another film of that era that, again, as I was a kid, I remember that being on all the time. My granddad loved that film. And now it's not as well known. And yet, what an incredible cast in that. You know, I mean, Jack Hawkins, all his contemporaries, John Gielgud, Jack Hawkins, you know, John Mills, Ralph Richardson, they all came back for that. And, you know, an anti-war musical. To me, I'll have your say in a minute. It's rooted in a late 60s kind of anti-war. The way it presents the anti-war story worked in the late 60s, doesn't work as well now. What's your feeling about Oh, What a Lovely War?
For me, it's just, I mean, again, it's not a one that I kind of gravitate to. It had a great cast to it, and it's obviously that period after Longest Day. Well, there are many of them where it had an all-star cast. But again, I just don't think it was quite the right fit for him. And I think it's very telling that these films that we talk about, these last 3 films, are all at a time when he wasn't, you know, going through the best time in his career. And I think it shows perhaps with the choice of films that like Fraulein Doctor, but also Oh, What a Lovely War and Dark of the Sun, probably I would say the only 3 that we get to in his career, which isn't bad when you consider the amount of films that he did do, you know.
Yeah. And then, of course, he has an absolute surefire hit again, although one, again, an ensemble cast, but manages to make, again, the role he has stands out. I mean, he doesn't have much screen time, but the relationship with Susanna York there at the airfield at Duxford, and that was a great scene, by the way, how it was set up when they're walking and doing the dialogue and everything's exploding behind them. It's like the takeoff scene in Catch-22 where the Martin Balsam and Richard Benjamin are talking, there's aircraft crashing in the background. It must have taken some real staging to have that scene work with all those things going on behind it. And again, he, in a small role, really, you know, he comes across very sincere. There's a real heart to Kenneth More's role that I think Christopher Plummer has a lot of screen time in that film and doesn't come across very likable. I don't think Michael Caine is very likable in it. Robert Shaw, I don't think, comes across very likable. But Kenneth More, again, it comes back to likability. Although he's playing a kind of a rather brusque air marshal, there's a real sense of warmth about it. So how did that film come about for him?
Again, I think it was one of those films. I mean, that's what Guy Hamilton, I think, who directed that one.
Yeah.
Harry Saltzman produced it, I think. And I think it was one of those where, again, if we're going to do a movie like this, we have to get Kenneth More. Of course, he's too old now to play a pilot, so he's on the ground. And the scene that you talk about, which was shot in Duxford, you know, obviously that's alongside Susanna York, who he knew well, and it's the first time they had been reunited on the film set since The Green Gage Summer, which is another great film that he did, which was also directed by Lewis Gilbert. But as you say, his performance in it is wonderful, but it's if I'm allowed to say it, it's probably my favorite war film of all time. I just love the film. I think it just fires full on every, whether it's the camera, the photography, whether it's the direction, it's the score. Everybody's great in it. And obviously it's the Battle of Britain, so it's the great story, great retelling of that, fateful summer. So yeah, I mean, as a war film, for me, it's my favorite war film of all time. So I can happily watch that many times.
James Holland and Al Murray on there, We Have Ways of Making You Talk podcast, did a vote about which was the greatest war film, Battle of Britain or Bridge Too Far. And the vote was really, really tight. And now I'm forgetting which one won. Whichever one I voted for didn't win. And I changed my mind twice in the vote. I was like, it's Battle of Britain. Oh, is it Bridge Too Far? I think I voted for Battle of Britain. Bridge Too Far won. I think that's how it went. I think Bridge Too Far personally has some really memorable moments, but some really quite crap moments. Whereas a Battle of Britain scores a solid 7 all the way through it. There's no really bad scenes. And it's just a great classic movie. But by then, of course, as Kenneth More, he's moving into the Forsyte saga, Father Brown, and what have you. And then, his health starts declining, relatively young. So, this photo you sent for the PowerPoint is that one of the last photos taken of him on a job?
Yeah, that's from a adaptation of Dickens's Tale of Two Cities, which was 1980, and probably one of the last photos. Well, probably the last photo I think taken by Angela of him on a film set of him working. And by that point, he was already suffering, which at the time they thought was Parkinson's, but it is they now believe was multiple system atrophy, which, as I say, was a degenerative disorder, and that would explain why he went downhill in his health very, very quickly. Because, of course, when he was diagnosed, they told him it was just a touch of Parkinson's, and he could kind of live with it. But he's from the time that he discovers that he has it, which is properly, and is suffering from it in 1980. He passes away by July 82. Which is very, very quick for that to have kind of taken hold on him. And one of the reasons why now, in my role as a manager of the Kenneth More estate, we're doing a lot of work with, or going to be doing a lot of work with the Multiple System Atrophy Trust, MSA Trust. So, it's one to have a look at if you don't know much about that disorder, because it's very rare. For people to learn a little bit more about it. Of course, you can go there and donate as well, because it was something that he took him. He was 67. He took him very, very young. At the end of the day, it's not an old age by any stretch, and he had a lot more to give still. So yeah, sadly he passed away in 82, and but his films keep showing, which is great. So
yeah, and maybe if he'd lived longer, he'd have had that cameo like Ralph Richardson came back in Time Bandits, and Alec Guinness again, and Christopher Lee, and he'd have had that kind of career boost as a really senior actor in Richard Harris in Harry Potter, that kind of thing that would have propelled him from the generation he was already popular with to a younger generation. But as we go at the top of the show, alas, people of tender years seem to have forgotten a lot about Kenneth More. So tell us a bit about, you've already spent a little bit, but what are you trying to do along with your book to kind of get Ken's story out there again, and the estate, and what's the aim with that, and also the charity work and the work to talk about the condition, but what's the game plan right now for you?
Well, the game plan really is just to have him remembered and to restore his name and restore his legacy, and it started from about 2018 with the official website and the digital archive of a lot of his personal belongings. And it's segued into the book, More Please, which is the first and only biography on Kenny that's ever been published. And now, really, what we're trying to do is push forward the legacy with having the links that he had to the Variety Club, which is now the Variety Children's Charity, supporting their efforts, which Kenny supported throughout his life with multiple fundraising. So we're working with them next. So that's one of the initiatives, and the others, as we touched on, is MSA. Again, trying to make people learn a little bit more about the disease and the disorder that he died of, which not a lot of people do, and it still doesn't have a cure. So again, those are two of the things I think that I'm most proud about us kind of pushing forward in terms of his legacy, because they are deeply linked to him. But also just that, you know, there are plans hopefully for a film retrospective once we get past COVID, and a big exhibition of all of his, you know, belongings. We have a whole collection of his film awards.
And talking of film awards, there's a bit of a show and tell. You have got an award there with us to show us.
I do indeed. Yes, this, which it does look a bit like the FA Cup, is the 1956 Picture Goer Award for the Reader's Vote for Reach for the Sky. And Picture Goer was, at the time, kind of one of the biggest film magazines going. And this is Kenny's actual award that we're very, very lucky that it still exists to this day, and that we're proud to have in the collection. So we very much hoping this and his other awards will be on display once we're able to do so, either in a big film museum or in an exhibition about his life and work. So that's one of the plans moving forward.
And I think, again, it's testament to his likability that was an award by the readers. You know, you get that with these awards. Yeah, it wasn't the critics did like him, but also the public just loved him. You know, I did a tweet that I said earlier, you know, about was he one of our most beloved actors? And I think he is. I think we can respect Jack Hawkins. I think we can respect Alec Guinness, but Alec Guinness, I think, can be a bit prickly, and Kenneth More is just very, very eminently likable. He's likable as a person. I've never met him, of course. He's likable in his film roles, and his legacy, I think, is. I hope it goes on. I hope the younger generation will discover his movies, and that they'll be found again. Even though we're going through this woke generation of banning things like Breakfast at Tiffany's, and I know a lot of these films have problematic scenes. And I'm not saying they don't have problematic scenes, but I don't want to see a day that we can't enjoy these classic movies for what they are, even if they have to come with some kind of warning saying, okay, these contain slightly outdated themes and ideas, but let's look at how wonderful they are. You know, it'll be a shame if we lose these films.
Well, I just hope that we're able to just continue, you know, his legacy, and you know, as we talked about, he was Britain's biggest star, and there was a reason for that, because he was just so good, so affable, so likable. And again, as we touched upon beforehand, but it's, you know, it's always good to note, and you know, it's the same that everybody always says every time I interview somebody, every time I speak to somebody, they always say he was just like that. What you saw on screen was what he was pretty much like off screen, and that's a rarity. You know, that's not, at the same time, that's not to be confused with playing oneself, but at the same time, it's a really, really good you know, a pointer as to why he's so liked, and not just by an audience, but by everyone who worked with him, because of he was down to earth, and you know, he you know, he just you know, lived on the bright side of life, and that's something that I think is there to see in all of his films and television programs to this day.
And just one last question before we kind of end things. Did he ever go to reunions of his ships in the war? Was there any attempt to stay in contact with any of his Royal Navy buddies, or did his career take precedence there?
I don't know. I think it just was a period of his life, and I'm sure he would have stayed in touch with people, but whether or not, we don't know too much about that, to be honest with you. What we do know, of course, is that, you know, it was something that he was intrinsically linked to him, and it was something that he you know, used to hone his acting career as he moved forward. But there were occasions where there were Royal Navy film related events held, one of which we touched on with Mountbatten. We have a photo in the archive, which were basically done, you know, events where the film industry would show films on board ships, and give them early release to be able to see these films because they were surfing. And Kenny was kind of very much behind that. So there was kind of lots of functions and things to help support those initiatives. So in a way, he kind of crossed back to those times.
Yeah, and that must suggest he had a sympathy and empathy for people away at sea and the role of the Navy. And I think I'd like to end with that. We were showing that photo again of him during the war. What a
yes.
It may have been not the longest life ever, but he managed to do a lot of things within that.
He packed a lot in. Yeah, he packs a lot in, and that photo you're showing is a very, very rare photo. It only appears, I think, once in publication recently, and one for the promotion of the book and in the book. And that's a photo from Jane, his daughter, that her mother took. And, it's just kind of classic. He's whistling away, leaving a pier probably on his way to, join the ship. And I just think it's a great photo of him.
It is a great photo. Well, I've really enjoyed this chat, Nick, and I've always been a fan of Ken's work, and it's nice to hear a bit more about the stories. And I wish you well, as do all the viewers, with the project, with the book. And again, for those watching, the link to the book is in the description below, and you can find the link to the official website, the estate website. There's some really interesting things. Look there, the art, the items from his personal collection are worth checking out. And well, good luck with the new edition. Good luck with the project, and maybe there's a few people watching this who'll make contact and say how much they appreciated your book and how much they appreciate Ken's career, because I think we all of us of a certain age, he's part of our childhoods, and he'll be part of my going older, because I will always return to watching those films because they're so great. I had a whale of a time watching Reach for the Sky again today. I cried at the some couple of bits again, like I always do, and just an extraordinarily charismatic actor, and it's been wonderful to hear about him. So thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Paul. Great talking to you.
And again, for folks, we've got more things coming up this week. I've been busy scheduling shows on YouTube. Got to add some descriptions, but we've got Tank Week coming up. We've got a show I'm recording tomorrow about Dirk Bogarde, and then we've got John Russell joining us to talk about theirs, the strife, the attack by the British Second Army into Germany in April 1945. So back to the battlefields again. But as always, don't forget to check out the links. If you would like to consider being a patron, consider checking out the Patreon link. Share with other people on social media what we're doing here on World War II TV. But it remains for me to say thank you, Nick, for joining us. And for everybody else, I will see you all again on a show very shortly. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you again.